Thank you very much, Philippa. I would like to welcome here Brent Sturlaugson. I hope that my pronunciation is good. From Kentucky University, that will present the Somewhere project.
Will there be video links, or did you not get that?
So you have videos in your presentation, right? In that case, we would need to. I'm not sure that the computer of Mark will gonna be enough strong to produce videos. We'll just do the images. All right. I mean, if you want, you can pass me the presentation. I can share it on my computer.
We can just move through.
All right.
Thanks. Okay, we had some video content that we'll skip over, but I think we'll get the gist of it. So thank you. My name is Brent Sturlaugson. I teach at the University of Kentucky. And the project I'll present today is on behalf of a big team of architects and designers, but also investors, artists, and community members that we'll see. So what I'll describe today is some of the goals, some of the strategies, and then the outcomes that derived from what's called the Somewhere project, which is an ongoing effort between this multidisciplinary team that seeks to rehabilitate abandoned mines in Appalachia to promote cultural and educational development. There we go. So we'll start just with a bit of background, go into some of the studio structure we ran as a graduate and undergraduate design studio, go through a few student projects, and cover some preliminary conclusions and then some next steps that we've taken since. So a bit of background here. We're not going to dive too deep into the mining history of the US, but we can see historically that the US has been among the leading coal producers in the world. And I think contrary to some of the historical decline that we've seen in northern France, coal production in Kentucky continues, and in a lot of Appalachia it does continue. But it started to decline in around about the early 2000s, although production is still ongoing to a certain extent. There's also an interesting inversion too that we're going to talk about here topographically, that in northern France, we've seen a lot of this constructed landscape that have become these slag heaps. In Appalachia, what we're going to be talking about is the removal of topography. So the erasure of contours in a method that's called mountaintop removal. So here in Kentucky, the mining camps on the left, a kind of typical example at the valley floor between mountains that were originally on the right, tunnel mined right through coal seam access along the contours, but that developed into what became known as mountaintop removal. So these coal seams that were mined by tunnel methods, it became cheaper and more efficient to simply blow up the mountain, take the mountaintop off. And a lot of that came through in this sort of legal mechanism that was called the broad form deed. So here shown is one of the early, let's say, profiters of the broad form deed, which technically allowed any means, quote, deemed necessary or convenient, right? So this was then exploited in subsequent years to include what we've now termed mountaintop removal. So here's a method that keeps the mountaintop in a contour mine, but now this is the method that has been taken up as the most efficient way to extract coal from Eastern Kentucky. So this is kind of what the landscape that we're addressing in Eastern Kentucky, when many of these mine sites are now abandoned and left to their own devices, right, without much rehabilitation effort. So here's the extent of what we're talking about and considering. North America in context, Kentucky is highlighted in the upper left. And then this is Kentucky There are some western coal fields that we're not going to talk about, but in Appalachia, which is on the eastern side of the state, this is the extent of the permitted mines that again, the state and a lot of us are thinking about. And then down here in the red circle is the kind of prototypical mine that we've taken on with this team and the group of students to reimagine and to seek to rehabilitate. So through this process, there had been a lot of layers and a lot of obstacles in place, part of which deals with access and legal title, right? So these mine sites are often buried in deed transfers, in property titles that are hard to track down. So here in our kind of prototypical mine site, just an example of the kind of layers of bureaucracy just to access the site. This is before you are actually talking about title transfer or deed transfer. So the logistics are, I think, deliberately complicated, right? A lot of these abandoned mine sites are now inaccessible only by virtue of being almost impenetrable by bureaucracy. So the project partners that came to us at University of Kentucky is again a group of investors and philanthropists that are seeking to take on this problem of abandoned mines in Eastern Kentucky. They're called Somewhere Appalachia. And they came to us with an idea of reinvigorating one of these sites through cultural tourism and educational development that revolved around a recent acquisition of one of our project partners in this 2013 sculpture by the Belgian artist Berlinda de Broekery, who this piece is called Cripplewood. Our project partner had spoken with the artist and had flown her out to Eastern Kentucky and talked about the kind of installation of this piece, this monumental sculpture. It's almost 20 meters long, on a mine site in Eastern Kentucky as a way to kind of catalyze development around themes of rebirth and regrowth that this art piece is largely centered. This is the video content that we'll skip over. So this was some of the backdrop that the project team came to us at the University of Kentucky with. And we then put it to a group of students, both graduate and undergraduate. Here we are at a visit at the mine site that looks not unlike, I think, some of the mine sites that we've seen already. And we ran it through what we have at the University of Kentucky called Studio Appalachia, which takes issues confronting Appalachia in general as a point of departure for some of our investigations and research. So the studio took on this model of inviting subject matter experts. So on the right, we have a forester who's talking about rehabilitating these mine sites through deep trenching and replanting, so reforesting these areas. Something about the reclamation efforts on these abandoned mine sites is such that the ground is too dense in order to grow any kind of substantial root. So what you're seeing here is our mine site after years of attempted regrowth, but nothing, the native forest can't reclaim that zone because of the dense compaction in the soil. The students put together a range of case studies that took kind of cultural development projects as a basis for catalyzing renewed growth. A lot of Eastern Kentucky sees a population decline since the fall of mining or since the decline of mining. So a lot of what the project team is interested in is finding new ways to encourage growth and development. The students conducted a series of site analysis and site mapping. In order to better understand the landscape, we held several community design charrettes. We traveled to Eastern Kentucky, met with local politicians and community members, artists, and other subject matter experts to help us understand what the students could propose in order to maybe instigate a vision for what this mine site could be. Here, the students on the prototypical mine site. On the left, you can see in the background what the original contours of these mountains were. and then what the mining had done when they removed the mountain. A lot of the existing mining infrastructure is still intact. So part of the reclamation efforts did not include removing this mining equipment and infrastructure. So that was an important part of the students' proposal to integrate that as part of the kind of story that they'll tell. So we had a series of conceptual design exercises, again, inviting local authors, artists in to help the students think through some of these problems and and some of their propositions. Again, held community forum where the students were presenting some early ideas in order to get feedback on some of the propositions. This, of course, was right before the pandemic shut everything down. So then the studio had to go remote, which was a challenge, but it ended up being, I think, a great way to come together around a kind of shared effort during this exceptional time. Again, the project was revolving around this monumental artwork. We had intended to bring the students to New York City, where the art piece, Cripplewood, was the backdrop to an opera. Of course, the opera was canceled, but this was part of the idea. And then the students were able to put together a series of proposals that centered around this master plan for the mine site. Again, this is in a very rural setting, so there wasn't any existing community or urban infrastructure to build on. So a lot of it was intended to be generative, or the metaphor they were often using was catalytic, right? How could you catalyze development through some of these architectural and landscape interventions? So what we're seeing here is the kind of core of the existing mining infrastructure here, around which a museum and education center was proposed by one of the students, down by one of the constructed reservoirs with a lot of the toxic runoff from the mine site would be the pavilion for Cripplewood, to be exhibited. Here in the upper right would be a new facility for the production of bourbon barrels. So the mine site could be reforested through some of this deep trenching that was described to us by the forestry folks. And down here, a farm to table restaurant. So this could be seen as a kind of destination tourism, and then some temporary lodging here for the kind of art park experience. So we'll run through a few student projects quickly before wrapping up. Here's an example of a student work that took on the farm to table restaurant as a series of these interconnected rings that sought to bring together on-site food production, local fare, and the kind of integrated landscape here through a series of cross-laminated timber beams. One example of the Cripplewood Pavilion took as its source of inspiration this constructed landscape, right? Kind of rebuilding the contours of the mine in this quite subtle but quite organic form that mapped the contour of what topography used to be there. So here in the entry procession would be met with the Cripplewood sculpture as the sole piece in this proposition. Again, thought to be constructed from glue laminated timbers. A lot of the student projects were interested in harnessing local economies and local knowledge. Timber resources once were a big economic driver, and we're looking into ways to reinvigorate some of that as well. And then a couple examples of this arts and education hub. Here, again, kind of restoring some of the landscape through a formal logic. Media hub, artist studios, workshops. And then the final student project, which again took as its centerpiece some of this existing mining infrastructure and proposed a series of new additions around this kind of central basin of production and transport through these series of walkways that connected exhibition venues, classroom space, different educational programming. And then to conclude, the project had stalled from the pandemic, but we're seeing a lot of momentum still in local communities, but also in national and international press. The project was picked up in the Architects newspaper, the Virtual Design Festival in Dizine, and is currently underway with an exhibition in Eastern Kentucky to kind of bring some of these ideas back into the community to then start again the feedback process of what we could imagine being implemented. And then a kind of spin-off project, which I think relates to some of what I've heard already today about heritage and about the conservation of that heritage. In Appalachia, a lot of this landscape is yet to be recognized as even present, right? So the topographic record is largely absent, right? That the United States Geological Survey still shows these mountains as having peaks. So something that I've started to develop with some students is a record of these peaks, right? So this is the reconstructed topography of some of these lost mountains. And so far in our analysis, we've come up with several hundred peaks that are now, we're kind of rebuilding as this archive in both physical models and drawings, but that's the subject for another talk. But I'll leave it there and look forward to discussion and questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brent. If you want to discover more about this project, you can go to Palazzo Bembo. I don't know if you are aware that there is an exposition organized by European Cultural Center, where we also take part, Kentucky University and the Aachen University. So if you stay a few days in Venice, you can go and check. It's very interesting. So I would like to welcome now Shubra Kansal for her presentation of Charleroi in Belgium. She also took part in the students' workshop during this week with us.
Hello, yes. Okay. Hi, my name is Shubra Kansal, and I'm an architect from India, but I've been studying in Belgium for 2 years, doing my master's in urbanism, landscape and planning at KU Leuven, Belgium. And the project the project that I'm going to show today is a part of my master's thesis, which was a 1-year exploration into this post-mining territory. And I would like to mention that I've been very well guided by my promoters, Professor Kelly Shannon and Bruno de Mulder. They have been instrumental in this work. So the image that you see in front of you is, well, this is a colorful collage that I made. But before this image of Charleroi started being the norm, Charleroi was for a long time an image of coal, dust, smog, unsanitary conditions. Can I change the slide myself? Yeah. The second one. This one? This one? This one?
Roll it down. Wait a moment.
Yeah. Do I have to press really hard?
No.
Okay. Point. Okay. So yes, Charleroi is a part of, no. And how do I point? Okay. Yeah, Charleroi is a part of the coal mining belt that we've been discussing today. And it, the belt goes from France and Pas-de-Calais region to then Belgium, where the Charleroi is located, and up to the Ruhr Valley in Germany. And I looked at this scale, which is an 18 kilometers by 12 kilometers for a larger analysis. And then I zoomed into one part to see how we can design in terms of an urban design projects. Yes. So, well, I wanted to really understand the territory because for me, coming from India, it was a very different, place. And before industrialization took its full force, till the beginning of the 18th century, actually, Charleroi was a set of villages, and it had an agricultural and artisanal occupation. So mining was always being done, like they used to extract coal, but not at the scale that the industrial that happened in the industrial era, because of the steam engine, the water pumps, the railways, the everything paced up, and the landscape transformed immensely, and also in terms of its social landscape, migrations from surrounding regions first, and then from regions far beyond, from Italy, from everywhere. And then there was a gradual decline. And with the gradual decline of the mining industry, the whole territory was left with a lot of socioeconomic problems and a vast territory to take care of or to do something about. So my thesis is about understanding the present and also creating a vision for what it could be. So to understand, I borrow from an anthropologist called John Murrah, and he studied the Andes Mountains as a set of ecological floors. So he says that the way the soil and geology functions, it creates different settlement patterns. And these patterns are a way of us relating to the land. So for example, in the first era where there were villages, the topography and the soil determined where the forests would be and where the agriculture would be. And also along the river, you would have pasture lands because of its humidity. And afterwards, when we started exploring the coal region as an ecological floor, which is the belt we saw earlier, it did not matter what the soil composition was. What was important was the geology, was the fact that where can you extract coal? And in Charleroi, it was everywhere that the topography allowed you to. And even when it didn't, there were ways to do it. And so, yes, and then the relation with water really transformed because all the heavy industries then started being placed in the valley instead of the pasture lands. And this map shows a bit of what I was talking about. So the north, this is the Sambre River that divides Charleroi into two parts. And the north, you have loamy soil, which is better for agriculture than the south, where you have a limonous composition. So the way the settlement happened, all these dark ones are the villages, the old villages, is very different on both sides, as you can see here. And this is a mapping of all the places where coal was mined. So all these are the mines, yeah, coal mines, and the lines that you see are the railways, the small railways that were built to extract huge amounts of coal from the territory. And what you see here is the imposition of the industrial infrastructure. For example, all the factories, they were placed in these smaller valleys that you see here, because they had the presence of water, and also the topography there was easier to navigate than in places with higher topography. So there was a real relation of the topography to the way that the industrial settlement happened, and the valley was canalized. Water locks were placed to make sure the water flows in a certain way to transport the coal. This is a zoom in of the place that I studied more deeply. And here you can see the subsurface coal veins and also where the pits were located. No, yes, where the pits were located. And this is just an image of how the pits looked. So I really wanted to understand the formation of the shapes of the new topography. And this is what is there in red is the railway infrastructure that was put in to transport these the coal that was extracted to smaller factories of material construction, of iron, so all over yeah, the place. And then this is really the contrast that you see. The softer lines at the back are the real topography, that original topography that existed, and then when mining came, it transformed the valleys into blocked valleys, and also flattened surfaces next to the rivers to place industries. It created incisions in the landscape to place the railways. So the landscape went through a lot. And the urban also evolved with this diffused expansion of the region. So the way mining towns were located, but also developed along corridors of movement, because everything was about moving materials, moving people. So the territory was involved in creating roads, creating infrastructure to get things out, to be in a constant state of motion, flux. And then this is a map of what is the post-industrial now, which is a layering of everything that has been, that these two past layers of agriculture and mining have given to us. And what do you see in the green are the new terrals, are the forested terrals, semi-forested terrals. And also you see a diffused urbanity which has come everywhere, and the road infrastructure which has become extremely pervasive. And there is a vastness of difficulty in the way that there are a lot of socioeconomic problems. There is obsolete housing, because housing from the mining era has still survived, and it is a sort of a trap for low-income groups to still find cheap housing in Belgium. And so I mapped the current proposals that were happening in Charleroi, and I realized that we are still a bit dependent on outdated planning concepts of car-centered mobility, of moving from across territories, creating more roads, but also class-based riverfront redevelopment projects, mixed-use projects. So if you really see this map and then you see this one, you see that the impact of our projects, the development potential is we're focusing on development, but the premise of my thesis is, can we actually reposition the urban that is existing instead of redeveloping it, because it is a huge territory and you cannot possibly redevelop it, and probably there is no need of doing that as well. So that is my research question, taking the side of the new nature that is now present on the territory. How can the urban be repositioned? So I borrow from another very nice concept, which is proposed by Matthias Ungers and Rem Koolhaas. For Berlin. So Berlin became, massively urbanized, and they proposed this concept of selecting and intensifying the urban by taking away certain paths which are not characterizing the space. And so what happens to those paths that are taken away are that you create, these are the empty spaces that are the paths that are sort of taken away, or they become the green lagoon of nature. So they become different kinds, different textures of green, of open landscapes. They don't have to be maintained all the time. So this is the concept that I tried to implement. So first I mapped, again, the contours of the present territory. The red lines represent the ridges and how water is flowing in the territory. No. And then also the new greens that we have, the valleys that we have, and how valleys are already being vegetated without there being any plantation drive because of just the way the land functions. And then this is the existing urban. So I tried to then map and distill only the urban that sort of conforms or interacts with the landscape, with the topography, and how well some roads can diffuse over time to give us a landscape which is not so much about going from one place to the other, but actually developing a relation to the land. And then I will zoom in to well, just show quickly how this goes down to the human scale. Yes, and this is the site. And I took this site because you can see that there are different housing tissues. So this is the old mine workers housing that is really, really old. But here you have these blocks, which are social housing blocks, which were built to as social housing over flattened mining sites. So they suffer a lot from social exclusion, and the way that the vegetation is grown around these is a bit to sort of hide and not have a view of these housings. So there is a lot of social exclusion that is happening, and also the old housing suffers from parameters of space and contemporary living, because when they were made for miners who used it for 7 hours just to sleep, but now whole families are living in it. So people have created sort of extensions at the back to make it fit for their needs. So this is another thing that we found on site. 2 minutes, okay, no problem. And then, then I decomposed the large seal surfaces, which is a lot of this parcel, to sort of form a thin forest. So all this gets translated to a bigger vision. So all the other roads sort of phase away, and these become the urban corridors, to say. So, and these are not just large asphalt areas, but they actually become the spaces where people interact, where a thin forest is started to function, which is the urban forest. And these also act, because they are placed in the valley, as large collectors of water. And then the intention is also to find places where agriculture can take root, urban agriculture can take root. And these are also connected to these source of water, but also to the urban tissue on where the inhabitants can find space to work. And well, slowly the vegetation would start creating connections and form new corridors of movement. So instead of the road taking center stage, it's the routes through vegetation that become important. And this is just to show, how a seal surface sort of becomes a stepped well that collects water. Some of my Indianness showing here. And the last image is of sort of a transformation of the existing tissue in a way that it's done with inhabitants, but it's really, well, it's pointing towards a new kind of modernity and transformation, which then places itself in the growth of the forest. Yes, thank you.